Good morning, good morning. Yes, we're working on another episode. Today we'll be talking about embalming. A lot of people have questions. Almost every day of my life when I'm in public, someone asks me a question about embalming or how a deceased looks. So today we're going to talk about it a little bit. When embalming started, what made it popular in America, and what we do now, the technique we use, some of the chemical that we use as well. So let's get into this episode. Not going to show any foolishness from around the world, kind of getting away from that, but just wanting to educate. So let's go forward. Embalming. What is embalming? Embalming is the preservation and disinfection of a human remains and to recreate a lifelike appearance. It's that simple. That's all the profession entails. Now, what is our role? The disinfection is the most important part. A lot of the bacterium that we as a human can encounter will kill you. Yes, will kill you. So the main part of our job is to make sure that none of that goes on. And if you're going to have a public viewing, that body is thoroughly disinfected as well as preserved, because we know most people will touch the remains, and then whatever they touch from there is possibly contaminated as well. Embalming actually began in ancient Egypt. When you read your Bible, you read about Pharaoh, and Pharaoh had embalmers. The embalmer actually stayed in the palace and ate at the table with Pharaoh daily. That position was held high in regards of integrity. He had to do a good job because sometimes it was a month or so before we even had the service. Brother Dwayne Jones, good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining in and always supporting. Trying to educate, as you know, and that's what I'm going to do as long as I'm breathing. So, getting back to the ancient Egyptians, the process of embalming took about 30 days. Each organ was removed from the remains, treated, and placed in what is called a canoptic jar. If you see the photo at the bottom of the screen, that's what a canoptic jar looked like. After all organs were removed, the body was then soaked in the nitrate solution. After being soaked for a certain length of time, the body was then wrapped, which then caused mummification. Because of the dry heat in Egypt, in any land that has sand like that, you tend to get a mummification process when the body is interred. And yes, mummification is a form of preservation. Now, in the Middle Ages, embalming began to change. As we took on formal religions, the people paid sacrifice to the body, and because of it, it was embalmed to preserve it. As well as we had a lot of medical and scientific advances during the Middle Ages and the European periods. We had things like discovery of the circulatory system. Going a little further, here in America, Dr. Thomas Holmes, who was actually out of New York, he's considered the father of modern embalming. And embalming became popular after the Civil War. During the Civil War period, so many soldiers lost their lives, especially in the battle at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The remains had to get back home. They didn't want them to decompose on the battlefield. They wanted to try to give a respectable service to this soldier that lost his life. And one of the only ways to do it was through embalming. So during that time, Dr. Holmes was estimated to have embalmed over 4,000 remains during the course of a 4-year war. Now, during that time, we did not have the chemicals that we have today, and a lot of them chemicals were based on arsenic, which, as you know, is a poison. Yeah, but that's how embalming started, using arsenic in a solution to preserve the remains. Now, as I said, we have 3 reasons to embalm. Number 1, preventing the spread of pathogens and ensuring safe handling when touching this remains, including dressing and casketing when the family coming to view. If they choose to touch the remains, a lot of people will hug, kiss the remains, even take selfies with them nowadays. It's a new society. The second, and one of the most important reasons, well, is preservation. We want to delay decomposition of your loved one so that we can have a successful viewing, transport your remains to another city or country if necessary, and to have a pleasant funeral service. Now, a lot of people ask, is it mandatory to embalm? No, it is not. If having a service, funeral service, with the body being present, a public viewing, past 24 hours, the law says that we must embalm in the state of Virginia. Yeah. Now I want you to think of something. We have 2 religions that normally do not embalm, and we know that. The Jewish religion and the Muslim religion. But one of the key factors there is they tend to bury before sundown the next day. During that case, we will bathe and disinfect the remains, surface disinfection, because still people like to touch the deceased, and we want to make sure that they are disinfected so you don't catch any type of bacterium or disease from the remains. And lastly, to create the lifelike experience or appearance. Most general public puts that as number 1. Lord, how mama look, how somebody look. Lord, the embalmer did a good job, the embalmer did a bad job. All of that is subjective. I am grateful that God has given me a gift of embalming, and I can tell you, embalming is a skill that can be taught. I was not raised in a funeral service family. My mother and father were not funeral directors. I honestly was trained as a musician. I dreamed to have been a college band director, but life changes. So you can learn this skill, such as anything else, an instrument, a sport. If you dedicate the time, you will get good if you choose to. But to recreate the lifelike appearance is mandatory from how I was taught. The human remains is the most important thing that we have in in the funeral home, your loved one. So if we can't make them look the best, what are we here for? I have some people have said, Mr. Fisher, I went to so and so and looked at such and such and they looked horrible. I have no reply because I don't know what the embalmer had to start with. The human body can go through a lot, especially through trauma and the disease process. Our remains can lose so much weight that they appear to be skeletal. So now the embalmer has to use some other techniques to try to fill them out. We call it tissue building, to make them look more like themselves when their health was better. Now, your embalmer knows some science as well. We take anatomy, microbiology, pathology. Now, why anatomy? To educate you all, while embalming, we use the circulatory system. Most of us will inject our solution into the internal common carotid artery and we will drain from the internal jugular vein. Well, how do you get it? We make a small incision, normally about an inch or two, in the clavicle region, which is your collarbone. Truthfully, one of the linear guides is the medial border of the sternocleidomastoideus muscle. Once you locate that muscle and make an incision about an inch to 2 inches, you blunt dissect the muscles, sternocleidomastoideus and the platysmal muscle. Looking straight down, you should see the internal common carotid and the jugular. The jugular you'll probably see first because it's usually full of blood and sitting higher. It's elevated. These two structures are then ligated and brought above the skin level, and these are the vessels that we use to inject the embalming solution as well as to drain the blood from your loved one. Embalming is truthfully a displacement process where your blood is displaced with embalming solution, which will disinfect and also preserve your loved one. Then, before we start, we always do a case analysis. We have to look at what are we having to work with. No two cases are the same. No two embalming solutions should be the same because each body is treated individually. Some may be dehydrated, meaning a loss of moisture. Some may have suffered trauma. Some may be full of edema or extra fluid, meaning swelling. Some may be jaundice. That's a discoloration where the skin tone turns yellow. A different type of solution must be used for each of these cases in order to have success. So, yes, your embalmer, well, the young boys call embalming post mortem surgery. And that's truthfully what it is. We are post mortem surgeons that use the vascular system as the method of transportation of our chemical to preserve your loved one. Now, with the chemicals that we use, most of them are formaldehyde based chemicals. We also have some that are glutathione based, and each has its own advantage and disadvantage. I choose formaldehyde because, in my opinion, it preserves the remains for a longer period of time without dehydration or any type of issues. Now, in the chemical, they're mixed a lot of additives as well. We have humectants, things that add moisture. We have diuretics, things that can pull out moisture. We also have things like lanolin and surfactant, things that break surface tension so that the chemical can combine in solution easier. Some of the special instruments that we use: arterial tubes. The arterial tubes hook onto the hose of the machine. As the machine is filled with the chemical and water, it pushes the solution through the tube into the artery. We use forceps, aneurysm hooks, trocar. Just like a medical doctor, we use the same type of instruments. We have different techniques of injecting. Yes, as I mentioned, arterial embalming is where the chemical is run through the vascular system and drained. And I'm gonna keep it real. Well, where does it drain? Into your city water supply. That's where it drains. I can't lie to you. What do we have to say about it? Nothing. The law allows that. My personal opinion, that may need to be changed and looked at as we go forward. All waste may need to be held in a septic tank, which is then emptied by a biohazard company. Because my thing is, I'm not believing that every bacterium that comes through the funeral home can be killed by the process at the water treatment plant. I can't be convinced of that. Okay. After arterial injection, we use cavity embalming. That's when a trocar is inserted into the remains in the abdominal region, where we're then trying to get any fluids or gases out of internal organs. Once we have done that, we replace it with a chemical that is stronger than the arterial, because this chemical is going directly into the organs to disinfect and to preserve. Sometimes you have blockages or issues and chemical won't go into an area. Like, say, a lower leg, the thigh is getting chemical, but you notice from the calf down and the foot is not. We then may use what is called a hypodermic injection. Versus the circulatory system, the trocar is used, which is a long hollow instrument. Some people say it looks like a sword. And as we insert it into that area, the chemical is forced in through the machine to preserve that portion. Now, our hypodermic injection is not as effective as arterial, but if arterial is not going well, back it up with hypodermic. to make sure that area is saturated with chemical and that body's still going to look good. Here's some religious and cultural perspectives on embalming. Most Christians accept embalming because we like to have public viewings and we love celebrations of life. But as we're getting into a new age, some are preferring natural burial, where the body is not embalmed and placed into the earth in a natural way. We know the Jewish and Muslim perspectives do not favor embalming at all. Okay? Our Hindu and our Buddhist tend to favor cremation, but on rare occasion, they will go with embalming. Now, in today's society of secular and cultural considerations, it's all personal choice. No two people think the same, no two people want the same, and no two people have the same concerns on environmental concerns. So it's personal choice. There's no right, there's no wrong. A couple of final facts and takeaways. Number one, the formaldehyde myth. If you embalm a body, it'll last forever. No, it will not. Over time, an embalmed body will even start to decompose and break down. It just takes longer. That's the honest truth. Abraham Lincoln really popularized embalming. As you know, when the Civil War ended, the Emancipation Proclamation was read by Abraham Lincoln, and he was about to sign a few things for the Freedmen Bureau to give us African Americans a few more rights, and he was assassinated. It was such a tragedy. He was embalmed and then taken on a nationwide tour around the country showing off his body. And people were amazed because they'd never seen a human remains look that good that long and travel around the country. As I told you earlier, arsenic used to be the main chemical used in embalming fluids. But when the bodies were embalmed and water tables were then tested, they were noticing that arsenic was in the groundwater. And if you have a well and you're drinking out the groundwater, you're starting to poison. Then we learned of formaldehyde, and that issue went down the drain. Now, here's something else I know most people really don't know. Embalmers, licensed embalmers, comprise less than 0.5% of the total American workforce. Just want you to think about that. Let that sink in. There are over 330 million citizens in America, and less than 0.5% are licensed embalmers. Could be a field you may want to consider getting into if you believe that funeral service will continue going forward with casketed bodies going to the cemetery. Somebody will have to know how to embalm and to do it well. Probably the next generation, you can name your own salary. If you come with skill and technique, you can name your salary. 6 figures will be so easy because 6 figures now is normal. When I started, it was unheard of almost 40 years ago. But now, funeral service is such a small industry, you can really succeed if you want to. That ends this session of Embalming Talk. Now, if you scan the QR code, I have a PDF of interesting facts of everything we talked about today. I know you can't remember everything you hear, so if you want to read it on a piece of paper, just check it out. And every topic we discussed is there with a little more detail. And next week, don't mind the date, probably won't be the 20th. Let's move it back a week. We're going to talk about death benefits unlocked. We're especially going to talk about Social Security benefits. A lot of people do not take advantage of everything they could. We're going to get into VA, Veterans Administration, as well as active duty, retired, and veteran benefits. If your loved one was in the military, you are entitled to a few things. Everybody's not going to tell you. You're going to have to fill out some document. But why leave the benefit on the table if it's due you? Your loved one earned it. You should know how to apply for it so that you can benefit. All right, this is Mark Fisher. If you have any thoughts, ideas, leave it in the comments. Talk about anything. Mark Fisher in your funeral home. Hope you have a great day. Take care.